Welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. Just a reminder that we are a deciding body that has been appointed by your town council to make recommendations and decisions on land use matters within the town of Los Gatos. We welcome your attendance tonight, and we certainly encourage your participation. I do ask that if you would like to speak tonight on anything on the agenda or during our verbal communications, that you just fill out and submit a speaker card that looks like this. It's located in the behind the chamber benches. And also, if you would like any of the information that we have before us, copies are available in the lobby. There's a desk out there with all of the public documents that we have before us. So, okay, and can we have roll call?
Commissioner Bourgeois?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Talsfor?
Here.
Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Vice Chair Jensen?
Here.
Chair Saya?
Here.
And Commissioner O'Donnell has an excused absence.
Okay, and Commissioner Erickson, do you mind leading us tonight in our pledge? Okay, there are no draft minutes in our packet, so we don't have to look at that, but I do have one written communication. That is a desk item for item number 2. It's fairly short, so hopefully you've all had a chance to review that. Thank you. And we do have one requested continuance, and that is for item number 1. Commissioner Bourgeois?
I just wanted to state for the record that I live within 500 feet of the subject property of item number 1, so I'll be recusing myself from the vote.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen?
I also live within 500 feet of the subject property, so I'll be recusing myself from the vote.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. And commissioners, as I did mention, we have item number 1, which is 339 and 341 Bella Vista Avenue. That has been requested for continuance. Commissioner Erickson, would you like to make a motion?
I'll move to continue item number 1 on our agenda tonight to the meeting of October 12th.
Okay. And Commissioner Telesfar, are you seconding?
I'll second that since you beat me to the punch.
Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 approving, no one disapproving, and 2 abstains and 1 absent. We are now at subcommittee reports. And in addition to serving on the Planning Commission, the commissioners also serve on at least one other subcommittee, and we use this time to give each other updates on what has transpired since our last meeting. I believe the Historic Preservation Committee and the General Plan Committee has met since our last meeting. Commissioner Erickson, do you mind providing us an update?
The Historic Preservation Committee met this afternoon and welcomed Commissioner Smith as a new member and had the normal initiation ceremonies, which she survived. And we had one informational item and then had a presentation from the property owners for the Old Town, and were asked to review some exterior modifications to the space which was formerly occupied by Seattle's Best Coffee, which they're preliminarily under contract to lease to Anthropology, and so they wanted to put heavy wooden doors on the space, and that's not consistent with the nature of and so the recommendation was for them to put some lighted doors in and do some other things to make it more consistent with the property, which they will take back to Anthropology as they continue their conversations about that.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Commissioner Erickson? Okay, and then Commissioner Jensen, do you mind providing an update with the general plan?
Madam Chair, it was actually the North 40 Specific Plan Advisory Committee, which is made up of town council members, planning commission members, and members of the general plan and members of the general public. And the purpose of the committee is to hash out and ultimately, hopefully, develop a specific plan for use of the property that we refer to as North 40, which others of you in the audience or otherwise may know as the Orchard property at Los Gatos Boulevard, and Lark and Highway 85. So the town is trying to develop a plan to put in use. If there's a future development, it would have to meet that plan. So we looked at a revised site plan, which included housing, retail, possible other uses, and discussed that. There were comments made on the revised site plan. We also discussed potential uses, including sizes of different retail property and nature of retail property, and heights of potential buildings were all discussed at that meeting. And we are planning to have another meeting, which the date of which has not yet been announced yet. But you could follow the North 40 plan progress on the town's website if you're interested.
Thank you. Any questions of Commissioner Jensen? Okay, thank you both for those updates. Okay, we are now at verbal communications. This is the opportunity for those in the public to speak on something that is not on the agenda. I do have one speaker card, and again, if anyone else would like to speak, please just submit a card and bring it up to the desk. The speaker is Tim Boyd. Mr. Boyd, if you could just state your name and address when you come up, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Tim Boyd. I live at 101 Bella Vista Court here in town. I am here to talk about the abundance of new homes that are getting built in the town. I'm the father of 2 daughters at Van Meter School. I live on Bella Vista Court, which is 6 feet away from my fence is one of the new houses being built on Bluebird Lane. It's a beautiful development that, however, it's a little bit too dense for the neighborhood, and my concern is with the 90 homes that are getting built in San Jose, which I know you guys have no authority over, that's in the Los Gatos School District, the proposed 20 to 22 homes at the Honda site, and whatever gets done at the North 40, in addition to whatever gets done at the used car lot across from the Honda dealership, that all these new homes are coming in. The numbers that we always hear, with the 20 homes that were built in behind my house, they said there'd be 4 kids in the schools, which those numbers are a joke. People are moving to this town. They're not senior citizens retiring here. They're families that are trying to live here to take advantages of the great schools, which I can't fault them for that. That's why I moved here 10 years ago. But my concern is that all this new development is not, nobody is talking to each other. The town council says the schools aren't our responsibility. The school board says that we have to listen to, we have to take, we have to live with the decisions that the town council makes in terms of approving new developments, and all this kind of starts with you. So what I just wanted to come and implore you as a decision-making body to look into the other impacts that affect it when I haven't come to this meetings before, so I'm not going to blame you for saying that it's not your decision. The decisions you make, we can't, the schools aren't up to us. But I think we're here in a community. We didn't all want to have 3 separate decision-making bodies that don't talk to each other. We'd rather have them work together, and I think that we need you guys to all work together to keep Los Gatos the great town that it is and not let it downgrade, especially the schools. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd, for your comments. Okay, any other speakers for verbal communications? Okay, seeing none, we are going to move towards our new public hearings. As we mentioned earlier, item number 1 has been continued to another date, and that puts us to item number 2, which is a plan development application PD-11-004 located at 15400 Los Gatos Boulevard. And Mr. Paulson, will you provide tonight's report?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. In June 2009, the Town Council approved a plan development ordinance for 15400 Los Gatos Boulevard for a 40,000 square foot, 2-story commercial building. They also placed a caveat on that approval at their level that required 8,500 square feet of the ground floor to be either retail or restaurant. The applicant is requesting to amend that requirement. Tonight, the Planning Commission, is a recommending body to the Town Council, who has the final authority for plan development amendments. The applicant has provided information via letter of justification for the reasons why they're requesting this modification. The modification that they're requesting won't have, they're not proposing any modifications to the approved plans or site plans building that were previously approved, and no further environmental analysis is required for the proposed amendment. Staff believes the applicant's request has some merit. The challenge is that this is a requirement that the council put on the development. So staff recommended soft approval, and we're recommending that you make a recommendation of approval this evening. The modification they're requesting doesn't restrict the future possibility that either retail or restaurant could be on either that much less or more square footage than is in the proposed amendment. The modification will allow, as indicated in the applicant's letter of justification, they have a single tenant user that is interested in the site. However, knowing that this restriction is in place, they can't move forward with that, and I'm sure the applicant will provide additional information regarding that. Not allowing flexibility, which the applicant, as I'm sure many of you remember when this came through the first time, was requesting, and the Planning Commission didn't necessarily make a recommendation to council on the uses. However, the council did put that caveat on it. So they're seeking to kind of step back and have the flexibility to have a PD that actually allows for the uses that are allowed in the zone currently, in the mixed-use commercial zone. As I stated, the property owner has an interested single tenant office user that is interested in the site. The challenge has been, since the economic recession, lending practices have been very tight, and it makes it difficult for property owners to get lending for buildings on a spec basis, where 5 years ago that was a little more an easier proposition. So staff, again, recommends that the PC forward a recommendation of approval to the PD ordinance amendment to the Town Council, and the steps for taking that action are outlined in the staff report. There is, as we stated, a desk item, a letter from a citizen expressing their concerns with the modifications, and that concludes staff's report, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Commissioners, any questions? Actually, Mr. Paulson, I do have one. When we reviewed this the first time, we didn't specify uses, and I do believe medical office has the highest parking, I guess, ratio that we use. When we examined this, did we look at utilizing the highest parking? So, and does this change, would it fall under that, and would the parking be satisfied?
Adequate parking would be provided even if this was all medical office, correct?
Okay, thank you. Any other, Commissioner Smith?
Mr. Paulson, off of the top of your head, if they had 8,500 square feet of retail, and let's say it was a restaurant, and so let's say it had $1 million in sales, and what does that translate into in terms of retail taxes that the town would forego if there wasn't a retail use there or a restaurant use there?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I don't know off the top of my head. Obviously, we have the sales tax, of which the town gets, I believe, 1% of the sales tax. So 1% of
1 million equals 10,000.
Yes.
Sorry,
That's okay.
clicking along there. So in other words, what they would be asking us to forego would be $10,000 a year, and I'm just approximating.
Sure.
Would
For
that be
discussion
fair?
for discussion
Right.
purposes, yes, we'd be foregoing whatever sales tax could potentially be generated in that 8,500 square feet.
And then the second question is, this would be a single user. I just want to confirm that. Single user, no room for retail, I don't know, wheelchairs.
The,
pharmacy?
yeah, the applicant has expressed that they have a single tenant user. I don't know the particulars of that, and that's probably a better question to ask the applicant.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions for the applicant. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. So I will now open the public testimony. The applicant will have 3 minutes. Afterwards, anyone in the public who'd like to speak has 3 minutes. And then the applicant will be able to have another 3 minutes. And I believe it's Mr. Dare, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Good
If you
evening.
could just fill one out afterwards.
No problem. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Kevin Dare. I'm here representing SHP Newark LLC, which is the owner of 15,400 Los Gatos Boulevard. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your consideration on this PD amendment. As Mr. Paulson had mentioned, over the past 3 years, we've actually, since our approval, we've actually gone out for the past 3 years and hired Colliers International, 3 brokers who specialize in office and retail, to pursue and identify tenants for us in the open marketplace. We've worked vigorously to identify tenants. I've talked to many of them, and frankly, it's been a very, as we can appreciate with the economy, but also in general, the tenants are not coming. And we've actually gone to many retail tenants as well as office tenants, and we have not had very much luck in identifying tenants. What we've been doing all along as part of this process is that we have been seeking tenants that will take, and in accordance to the application that was approved, that will take space for the retail as well as for the office. We identified one particular tenant who is a medical office operator, and as we've discussed with them, they've expressed the fact that they are interested in coming to this location. The problem is that they cannot mix and match public use versus private use. And so they have a need and a demand for 40,000 square feet to support their medical office, their doctors, but at the same time, so they have a demand to take the entire building at the same time, and I've talked to them about adding retail space within the building, and that's something that, because it's a retail versus a public versus private issue, they've been extremely reticent about mixing those two things. So they want to support their patients, and that's something that they're very much committed to. So what we're asking tonight is approval to modify the existing plan development to remove the requirement that the 8,500 square feet of ground floor must be retail or restaurant. This then will allow us and will be able to help us move this project forward and to create, in effect, that eyesore into something that I think we can all be proud of. A building that will not only be a landmark, a very nice quality building, but also serves the community on numerous fronts. The first is that this medical operator is not in town. They do not have a presence here as it stands. Secondly, the project will stimulate development along Los Gatos Boulevard. And third, this will continue to, with this new development, it will continue to signal to the other high-quality tenants, and in effect that Los Gatos is open for business and that this project is going to get off the ground. And in a very short time frame, you'll see this contributing to the community, as opposed to right now it's not. And so we respect and we thank you for your time, and we request that you recommend approval of this PD application to Town Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dare. Commissioner Telesfor.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question for you. In your letter of justification, that would be Exhibit 3, it states that the medical operator will serve the local community with additional medical services not currently available in town. We have a lot of medical services in town. I'm trying to think what that could be. Can you tell us what that is? And also, my question also was, can we learn the name of the tenant that you have in mind tonight?
So I recognize that there are many medical services in town, and I didn't mean to say that, and that this is an operator that's not currently in town. Not that you don't have current services, medical services in town. It's just that they don't have a presence here locally. And I'm suspecting that many of the residents that live in town utilize this particular service provider, but they have to go outside the town as it's right now to be able to get the services from this operator. I wish I could share with you who that operator is just that we're under confidentiality, and now we can't share who that is right now.
Okay, thank you for that right now.
Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner Bourgeois.
Do you currently have a letter of intent with a contingency about the retail space, or is this, is this so imminent? I'm just wondering if you have any kind of a written agreement with this particular provider.
We're passing back and forth information, trading back and forth documentation right now, and this is a caveat to that.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Thank you, Mr. Dare. I have a couple questions. So the proposed building is 40,000 square feet. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the area required by the town council was 8,500 for restaurant/retail.
Correct.
So that 31,000 plus square feet remaining, if we took that away, that's not adequate space? Is it the 40,000, or is it that mix of uses that they're opposed to?
It's both.
It's both?
They need 40,000 square feet, and they're also opposed to retail use in the facility.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm having trouble understanding. They don't want their patients intermingling with a retail. Without knowing the details of the applicant or the design, I'm just having trouble understanding why there's concern about that mixing.
And that's a fair question. What I can just give examples of, and because I'm not the tenant, I just have to express what they've expressed to us, which is that as they operate, they have their clientele. They don't want to mix and match. For example, if you have a restaurant, and then you have someone that's just had a medical, went to the doctor, and to mix those uses, they are very sensitive to having the public use, so to speak, and the retail use. In effect, what they're saying is that they feel much more comfortable to keep their patients, and because they were going through the doctor and getting support from their physicians, they don't want it to be where there's kind of in effect, it's just a mix of uses that really aren't very compatible. There's other examples recently of other developments up and down the peninsula of even a 60,000 square foot medical office building in the peninsula that there's no retail use, and they usually like to be able to have the full facility to themselves because you don't traditionally see that mix. So it's not a compatible, set of uses.
Any other questions? Mr. Dare, could you just elaborate a little bit more on the efforts that your company has put forward in trying to secure retail and/or restaurants in the past 3 years?
Sure. So we've hired Alice Tang, John Kovaleski, and Trask Leonard. And by way of example, so John is a specialist in retail and office, and Alice and Trask are specialists in office and medical office. And so we have solicited numerous, in effect, we've took all the available potential doctors in the world that we live in, and all the potential tenants, office tenants that we know that we're looking for space and requirements, and the retail tenants that are looking, that have market demand, and they have specific requirements. And so we've approached a substantial list of these tenants, doctors, individual businesses, and have tried to solicit their interest in coming to this facility. What this would mean as a mixed-use project, we would have to, you certainly have the retail or the restaurant, group, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then from a office standpoint, it's probably going to be a multi-tenanted format. There's not going to be one group that wants 31,000 square feet necessarily in a mixed-use environment, because it's not big enough to actually be a corporate campus group, nor is it small enough to be, it'd have to in effect be small to really be able to service the small local operators. So we've taken multiple approaches. One is looking for the individual guys, then looking at and moving to the bigger groups that are looking for larger chunks of space. In effect, we still need an anchor of some sort somehow with the 40,000 square feet. So just because I have a guy that may say, I want 1,500 square feet, I can't go build a building for one individual doctor that wants 1,500 square feet. And by the way, I don't even have one doctor that wants 1,500 square feet. So we've made those attempts going kind of microcosmic, and then we've also did the middle of the road trying to find the bigger kind of core tenant. But we've also been in discussions with the guys that are looking for the whole facility as well. Now getting back to the retail, and I appreciate Commissioner Smith's comment in terms of the potential lost revenue. The fact of the matter, though, is based on this particular layout, even if we were to build it, the feedback that I've received from the retail tenants is that they're not going to come. And the reason why is that at 8,500 square feet, in effect, they're an island to themselves. And secondly, our ingress egress out of this project is right off of Los Gatos Boulevard. So it doesn't flow very well. And right now, as you can appreciate, the way that the retail market works is that tenants are flighting. There's a flight back to what is traditional, where it's all about parking in front. It's all about access. It's all about visibility. It's also about co-tenancy. And so we don't have really very many of those things. It's very hard for us to be competitive. So when I go out there and I show them a site plan that shows 8,500 square feet, which, by the way, a large restaurant is, a traditional restaurant like Viva, it's about 5,000 square feet. So this is 8,500 square feet. And it's much larger. So there's not one particular restaurant that I know of that would come at 8,500 square feet. For example, BJ's is 8,500 square feet. But, they take 200 parking stalls. And so I wouldn't be able to bring them in because practically we don't have the space for them. So the question comes down to that I've been asked is who can we bring? Who does make sense? And I've gone down the list. Believe me, we have the project down the street. We actually have many tenants for. And we bring the same site plan, or the 15,400 square foot site plan to these tenants. They're like, there's no way I can come here. Even if I wanted to come here physically because of our layout and also because of the ingress egress, I'm precluded to come here. And I'm not going to get that approved. And so that's where we've made every effort that we have tried vigilantly, but there's a lot of things that are constraining us from to be successful.
And just to follow up to that, so is it the economy that has changed in the past 3 years? Because when this was being reviewed 3 years ago, this was what we all came up with. And was it just speculation has changed? And so
if you recall, at council, I begged and pleaded that they don't put this requirement on me because I knew going forward. So there's two things. One is the economy in general is just harder. But that's not the reason why this isn't getting leased up. The retail side of things, at least. The retail side of things is just that the figure and the format, and this is what I expressed numerous times, that it's going to be very difficult on a practical basis, on a market basis, to actually get retail tenants to come based on this configuration. And so I still hold to that. And that, in effect, the market, has proven that because I just don't have the interest level from the tenants.
thank you. Commissioner Telesfor?
I have two questions. Let's see, let's go back to, you were saying that the building, the way it's designed presently, really doesn't allow you to offer the kind of retail space that a retail, hopefully, a tenant might want. But you showed us one design, but we haven't, or I don't even think we've seen architecture inside. Is that correct? It's coming back to us?
Architecture and site has not been
Right,
applied for.
so my thought is, have you considered redesigning it so that it would be more appealing? And to tag on to that, have you thought about, it sounds like maybe, if you had more space to offer to retail tenants, that they might be much more, approachable and interested in renting the space there.
And I appreciate the comment. Here at this particular location, generally for other locations, I would be much more open to that concept. But here in this particular location, more is not better, nor, frankly, is as I had mentioned before, what the tenants are looking for. They're going to be identifying, they want co-tenancy, right? And 2 acres doesn't provide the co-tenancy that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like a 7-Eleven plus, a Subway sandwich plus someone else. I'm talking about substantial co-tenancy that what really you can find at the North 40, not necessarily at, a 2-acre site that you can do 10,000 square feet.
One more question. So at the previous meeting, when we had approved this, I know that we did a lot of discussion about how we could, this site could possibly partner with the Newtown site. Did you explore that anymore, where you could go back and forth between the two sites?
Yeah, in terms of the connectivity, we have had those discussions with them. We haven't had them recently, but we did have those discussions, and I don't have an update with where we're at with those discussions yet.
Okay,
But
because we talked about that before. We knew that could be an issue, but, so I'm thinking that maybe that just needs to be further investigated. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Smith?
Could you tell us the other developments that you've done in town?
So right now I'm working on 16,005 Los Gatos Boulevard. As it relates to, it's a mixed-use project, and so that's retail and office and residential. That's what I'm personally working on.
And are there any other developments that are completed here in Los Gatos?
Not with Sandhill, but I've done other developments in town.
And those would be?
One specific example is 235 West Main. It's the office condominium development off Main Street, the old motel.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then, Mr. Dare, we'll go ahead and let the public speak, and then you'll have 3 minutes afterwards.
Thank you.
Okay, and again, a reminder, if you would like to speak, just please indicate so. I have one speaker card, and that's for Amy Despars.
Hi, I'm Amy Despars. I'm a resident, a parent, and a teacher here in Los Gatos. I'm speaking about the Gateway Project. I live directly. I drive down that street and I look at that mess every day. I presented at the last town council meeting pictures of the garbage, the weeds, the graffiti that I've been looking at for the last 3 years since this property has been owned by this person. I find it frustrating, as do all of our neighbors, that they were granted another extension, yet they can't take care of the property they have. There were also, from what we understood as neighbors, was they were responsible for taking care of the island on Gateway. What happened? Tambark, ground cover, whatever you'd like to call it, dumped over weeds. I'm not sure if that's the town or who we're working with right now, but it's not a good reflection of someone who really cares about our town and our neighborhood and looking in the best interest for our neighbors. We worked really hard with you, and we appreciated all the support you gave us with the retail restaurant. We felt like it followed the plan of the boulevard and what we're looking for, a walking, neighborhood-friendly place to pull for all of us on this side of town to have places to go to. So I'm speaking to you to oppose medical dental. I think we have plenty of medical dental. We have it on National. We have it on Good Samaritan. Who knows what's going to be built all the way down the boulevard right now on the corner of Los Gatos Boulevard and Good Samaritan. So I just really hope that you really, really consider what you're going to allow to come into this and that you really work with us again on it, because we really spent a lot of time on it and value the time you gave us. And I hope as a town, staff, before you approve any more people on extensions, you really look at how they're taking care of the property, because it's really frustrating for us as neighbors to look at it. And there is still graffiti there. I gave pictures to the town council. Graffiti did get painted on the boulevard side where everyone sees, but not on the Carlton side. Right now, the plants are dying. I went today with my son. There is some fungus growing all over the plants, white, furry, whatever. And we're tired. We're tired of looking at it, and we just really are asking for your support in this. And we just appreciate your time. Thank you so much, because I know that this is a tough job you have, just like with our town council, and we just appreciate all the time that you have given this. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Despars. Any questions of her? Okay. And I see no other speaker cards. So, Mr. Dare, if you would like to come back and just share your thoughts on what you just heard and any closing statements you'd like to make to us. You have 3 minutes.
I appreciate those comments. From our last, I understood that Ms. Despars made those comments in, I think, the last Planning Commission or Town Council meeting, and we went out there and made sure that, and I had our property manager go out there and see, and maybe we can clarify exactly what was, we understand it's a site that needs to be eventually redeveloped, and that's what we're here for. As it relates to the ongoing maintenance, we're very much committed to making sure that the community feels as if they are taken care of and that we're trying to do our best with this project. So we went out there and we had our landscapers go out there a few weeks ago, but we can go out there again just to make sure that the property is treated as best as it can. As it relates to the sidewalk and the speed bumps, as part of and as we move forward with this project in terms of the construction, that's when the speed bumps and the contribution for those speed bumps will be contributed. As it relates to serving this part of town, I respect the fact that it is an underserved part of town from a retail standpoint. But the thing is that we have to let the right sites do that for the community. And that's why as we went with 16,005 Los Gatos Boulevard and as we move forward with that plan, we're working with some really strong tenants right now that I think will service this part of town. And that's something that we're very mindful of, that we want to serve this area of town that has been traditionally underserved in the past. So I think, again, this particular project, 15,400, it's going to be something that we can all be proud of. It's something that it's going to stimulate growth, development, and I think just enhancing this part of Los Gatos Boulevard. And with this particular tenant, we're able to actually move forward and be able to do that. So again, I would request respectfully that Planning Commission forward a recommendation for approval of this PD amendment. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Bourgeois, and then Commissioner Telesfor.
Can you just remind me about how many persons, bodies, will be in that building if it goes to a single user that you're talking about? I mean, are we talking 100 people? Are we talking 200? Are we talking 50?
Just people, total people in general?
That are working in that building.
Or that are working in that building?
That would be working in that building.
Okay. In terms of a range, and I don't have an exact number, and I can, that's something that we can look at. As it relates to a parking ratio, maybe we can look at it from that perspective. So we have 5 per 1,000 parking as it's allotted for that site, so it's 4.9 per 1,000.
Well, let me just stop you there, because I'm not going into how many cars are going to be parked there. I'm actually trying to determine the best use for the community. If a building that size would be built, how many people would be in it to be purchasing goods and services from businesses up and down Los Gatos Boulevard? So I'm just trying to get a sense of the economic vitality
that it will generate.
That would generate, right? So that's where I'm going. How many cars are going to be parked? I leave that to staff to hold your feet to the fire.
150 people.
Okay.
Roughly.
All right. And normal hours, 9 to 5?
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Thank you, Mr. Dare. First of all, I just want to make a comment that, the 8,500 square feet was a minimum, so I hope you weren't stuck on that number when you were shopping it around to potential retail clients. I just want to state that. But my real question is, before we enter into discussion, maybe I'm just not getting it, but I'm really having a hard time understanding what is it about this site that does not make it viable for retail. Because when I go to the adjacent shopping center right next door and I can't find parking, it seems pretty vibrant to me. And so I'm having trouble understanding why the parcel right next door is not viable as a retail spot. So if you could maybe simplify it a little bit and explain to me why that's not viable at that location, because you said it's not necessarily dependent on the economy right now. It is tougher now, but that's not what's driving it. It's either the location or the site design. And if it's the location, we can't change it. If it's site design, we can change it. So I'm trying to understand why retail is not viable there.
Okay. And I can add my comments, and Ken Rodriguez can, he can come up and add his comments in terms of the actual design itself. So there's a few, as it relates to retail, the first and foremost, it's the ingress egress that is also impacting the ability for tenants to circulate. And I know it's a very sensitive subject, as we talked about going through the last meetings for this project, that gateway was not to be, you're not going to have ingress egresses off of that. So that is a very big contributor to this issue. Having the inability to access gateway and in fact the concern was that this may push traffic to the neighbors in the back, and that was kind of a non-starter. So we were very sensitive to that. So we had to design the project with that in mind. And I think we've done as good of a job as we can. We did go through, if you remember, different plan alternatives as we went through before, looking at trying to expand the retail side of things, right, and make it longer and elongated. And as we, regardless of the plan and the structure, it ultimately comes down to a few things. One is, this is not, so what retailers are we actually talking about? We're talking about, I think, retailers that would fit in with the characteristic and quality of the town of Los Gatos. And these also are retailers that we have to identify space for, that we have to create space for them that would be of interest. And with 2 acres, we cannot create a space, in effect, that it creates an environment where these guys will come. Now, I appreciate what you're commenting about in terms of the other project next door, where you have, in effect, an anchor, where it's a much bigger location, where you can feed off of that, right? But when you kind of start to extend down the road, what you end up having is, in effect, a space for strip center. And if the town of Los Gatos, as far as I understand it, that creating a strip center feel and having an area where it's not within characteristic of the town, that's definitely off limits. And so we were very mindful as we thought about it, as we also planned it. So I think going back to this plan, this is the right plan. This is the plan that we need to move forward with. As I really believe is that you have to let the locations, we have to let them grow organically of what they are. For example, the 16,005 Los Gatos Boulevard, it creates an area where we can have active open space, where we're going to be able to create that community where people are able to come and have that community, sit down, grab a cup of coffee, have a hamburger, have an environment to be. And that's the type of thing we need to be able to provide.
And just as a quick follow-up, so you don't think, Commissioner Talsvar brought up those connections we talked about, you don't think having that anchor right next door provides some synergy with your site?
Good evening. My name is Ken Rodriguez. As Kevin mentioned, they have worked for almost 2 years now to try to lease this. It was up in front of everything before Blossom Hill and Los Gatos Boulevard. That's received a tremendous amount of support from the retail tenants for a couple of reasons. Location, also that it is pure retail. We have a little bit of office up above, but the center that you mentioned, I was involved in back in the 70s and 80s, it has office on the second floor, and it's had lots of vacancies and currently has vacancies. If you recognize the one freestanding pad building that originally we designed for DeMartini Orchard, which and then I turned it into a Carl's Jr., is now a AAA office. It's not even retail. So I think from the standpoint of what the market is looking for is exactly like the Boulevard plan says, the node at Blossom Hill and Los Gatos Boulevard is stronger. And even though we do have pedestrian connections, and even though we have taken the building and projected it out so that given that retail tenant or potential retail tenant great identity, it's literally, there's 2-story behind it, so it's almost a freestanding building. As Kevin mentioned, the biggest objection was the access. It just doesn't have good retail access. It has good office access, but it doesn't have good retail access. So that is something that we dealt with. And I think, as Kevin mentioned, they've worked really hard over the last 2 years to lease that. But the good thing about this request is we're not taking retail off the table. We're just trying to add an either or to be all office for a tenant, or at some point as the boulevard grows and matures, after a lot of these auto centers are designed, built, and leased, there's still a potential for, good retail there.
Commissioner Telsford, did you still have a question?
I did have a question. It was actually brought up by Ms. Despars, who spoke. And so my question to you about the maintenance of the property is, what is the plan for that maintenance while we wait for whatever happens with the development? Do you have one?
So we regularly actually have our landscaper go out to the site to clean up the site, to weed. And so, again, I'm very much open to if there are specific concerns that maybe I'm not seeing, or there's things that we can identify and address, please, I'll provide my email, my phone number. You have direct access to me, and we will get it resolved right away. Now, I will say that there is an area along Carlton that we actually don't own, but it's actually, I guess, public right-of-way that we don't control. So we clean up everything within our our box, our area, and we'll do so as this thing goes forward.
So maybe you can work with the town on whatever else happens
Absolutely.
from here out. Okay. And just to follow up on that, and that's on page 4 of the staff report. As a recommendation, the staff is saying that the modification to your PD will allow the property to be developed, which will improve the aesthetics of the currently vacant property. I'm really having a hard time how that is understanding how that's a viable reason. I mean, it obviously would result in that anyway. So how is that a result?
I'm sorry, can you
How
show
is
me
this
which portion are you
modification a viable reason? It's on page 4.
Page 4.
Under conclusion recommendation, A, conclusion, second bullet. The modification will allow the property to be developed, which will improve the aesthetics of the currently vacant property. So how is this a viable reason that we should grant this to you?
I think the question is to compare the options. If we have a very quality building and it's going to be able to provide community service over the next however many years, as opposed to a vacant center, a vacant site that may sit for, and I cannot predict how long, when you compare those two, I think that the point is that this does add value, that the complaints are going to be no more, where we're not going to have, potential areas for, landscaping areas that are not acceptable or whatnot. But this is going to be a brand new facility across the board.
But the development in general would accomplish that.
That's right.
Okay.
And our ability to provide that. That's right.
Commissioner Smith?
Just have one question. How close are you to an LOI? Is it imminent after this meeting if it goes the way you want it to go? I need to know that from you. I need for you to make a statement on the record about that.
Well, as much as so let me express this. I don't control the tenant, right? So I can't promise you that, I cannot guarantee or go on the record that this is a done deal because we don't have a signed lease. But we, in many ways, are imminent. That we are working right now. I've been working on construction costs. I've been working on getting the lease and all the elements of the lease, at least as it relates to the LOI, worked out in terms of the points. And so we're very far along that way. So we're very close to getting that inked. And I'm working on construction costs, and we actually have their specs, and we identified now with our building based on the approvals and their traditional spec how that actually intersects. So we're working vigorously right now with the tenant, and we're very far down the road with them.
And do you have your lender?
That's a fair question. So we actually, the lender that we actually have for the project is open to actually providing financing for the overall project. But as it relates to getting the lender, I guess in your definition, once I actually have the approval to be able to move forward and I have the lease in tow, they will I can get the financing. And so that's what I have. So it's an order of operation right? They're not going to say, I commit to you all this money without knowing for sure that we can actually bring the tenant in based on the approvals that we have.
And Mr. Dare, going back to maintenance of the property as is, when you say regularly, can you just define how often do you have someone come out to the property in terms of landscaping?
I have
Cleaning.
our property manager comes out at least once a month, and the landscaper, I don't have a time frame. We can double check. I can confirm that it will be regular, as in once a month, to come out to make sure that the weeding and everything is done. And if your request is that it's done more often, we can accommodate that as well.
And can you clearly define what exactly, as of now, you are responsible for? Everything within the barbed wire fence, but what about the landscaping that is adjacent to the sidewalks?
And I believe that's part of our responsibility as well, so long as it's not the town's, it's not public area. So my understanding is that it is all of that area that you see of the landscaping along Gateway. It's just there's a 5-foot setback in the back off of Carlton that we don't maintain because that's not our responsibility.
So if I understand, you're talking about between the sidewalk and the fence?
Right.
Okay. Okay. Could I ask a commitment after this to meet with staff and with the interested neighbors on developing a schedule and a phone number?
Absolutely.
Because it has been an eyesore, as you say, for the past 3 years. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, any last questions? Okay, thank you. And I'm closing public testimony now. And commissioners, any questions of staff? Okay, any comments and or motions? Oh, question of staff. Commissioner Erickson.
So this is a question of staff. So if my recollection is correct, and it isn't always correct, at the Planning Commission meeting, we did not forward a recommendation for approval, but that was not related to the specific uses in the property. It was related to other kinds of concern which the commission had, if I recall correctly.
Correct.
But if my recollection about the town council meeting is correct, there was considerable discussion about the uses by the council, and the language in the existing ordinance that created the plan development was very specific about the amount of square footage related to either retail or restaurant use, and the location within the specific building. And so it seems to me that there was specific intent on the part of the council with respect to providing us a minimum amount of retail space that was more than just serendipitous. Can you comment on what your understanding of the strength of the intent of the council was and their action?
I would state that you're generally correct. The town council had a lot of discussion revolving around the uses and how much square footage potentially that should be. Should it be retail, restaurant, and what portion that should be? Ultimately, they settled on the 8,500 and the leg that is protruding, the first story leg that protrudes out to Los Gatos Boulevard. There were also comments from some that I think if they had best case scenario, they would hope that the whole ground floor would be retail. So I think that there was, in the spirit of compromise, that there was some options, and that's why they put the minimum. And so that didn't preclude, as has been stated tonight, that was the minimum to ensure that, I think, as stated, as these other properties develop and should the boulevard become more pedestrian friendly, I think maybe that becomes more of a viable option for the retail out there, but that's just not the current situation. But there was considerable conversation and discussion revolving around uses, and they were very specific.
Go ahead, Commissioner Erickson.
Quick follow-up question. So would you have advice on what sort of, so the town council took action that says that the present uses as specified in the PD ordinance are consistent with the general plan. So would you have advice on what sort of findings we would have to make to recommend removal of the clear intent of the council's action that they've taken now, since in general, the criteria for making a recommendation would be that it would be consistent with the general plan, which the present ordinance is. So upon what basis would we think about making a recommendation that would change the intent of the council as expressed in that PD?
Well, I would state that there's no quantitative formula for if a project is mixed use, X should be retail, restaurant, personal service versus office. After this approval, there have been, I believe, the building at the corner of Samaritan and Los Gatos Boulevard, farther north, is all office. And that was approved and found to be consistent with the general plan and the boulevard plan. You know, and as other applications come forward, we have applications pending for the Chevy site currently, which is looking to be all retail. I don't think that changing the use as proposed by the applicant precludes compliance with the general plan.
Any other questions? Any comments? Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner Jensen. Okay, Commissioner Jensen. She's giving you the floor. Go ahead.
I don't think the town council could be any more clear in its intent when it proposes an ordinance which includes the following. The first floor shall contain a minimum of 8,500 square feet of retail or restaurant space in the single-story leg fronting on Los Gatos Boulevard. That is very clear. As opposed to many situations we face when we're recommending something to the town council and we do not have a policy in place, entertainment policy, alcohol beverage is an ever-changing target, where we don't have clear direction. We couldn't possibly have more clear direction, and it was put in place by the town council. We are a recommending body to the town council. It strikes me that if the town council wants to change a condition that it imposed, these arguments should be made to the town council. I'm not punting our responsibility. I'm just saying that this, because I'm happy to recommend something different to the town council, often, as my fellow commissioners know. In this case, though, we have a very, very specific ordinance that for a recommendation that the Planning Commission didn't put in place, but the town council imposed after consideration by the Planning Commission. So I think this is something that is uniquely within the discretion of the town council to change or not change. We're not deciding economics, we're not deciding lease, we're not deciding tenant. We shouldn't be deciding that because we're not supposed to make planning decisions based upon tenants or necessarily economics. If someone wants to make a decision based on those factors, it needs to be the political body, which is the town council. So I'm happy to turn these comments into a motion to recommend denial, which I don't think we need to make findings for if there's any support for it, but those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Telesfor?
Right. And I could certainly agree with that, because the reason for this provision is very clear, and even more importantly, it's within the vision of the Boulevard Plan, which many of us have worked really hard to create and then to hold as something important to our town. My recommendation would be that we uphold the original PD with this provision. The 85 square feet retail is 8,500 square feet retail suggestion by the council was a beginning. And when I reflect back on those discussions we had in our meetings and the many, many residents, because let's not forget that we talked about this a lot, that we were hoping that this could enliven that area of town. And the support from the residents at that time was they would look forward to that as a gathering place to do shopping, whatever. So if the configuration of the building isn't working out to attract that kind of retail tenant, then we need to maybe revisit that. At the moment, it's not built. It's probably still, it's like pencil on paper. I hate to say it, it's not that simple. I'm not being frivolous about that. But we need to get this right. And I, for one, would support what the council has, what their vision is at this point. I think that's all I have to say. I would say one thing, though. If we, if the council were to, for some reason, decide that they would want to change this retail and take the provision out of the PD, then my recommendation would be that they would put something on it like a renewable conditional use permit, somewhat like they did before with Gardino's, and they could work that out. That would be something they could explore. And that's only, like I said, a suggestion if they decide to take out the retail. But I do not think it's in the town's best interest to change a long-term policy for short-run economic problem. I could be ready to make a motion on that.
Commissioner Erickson, did you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I'm pretty much at the same place that Commissioner Jensen expressed in terms of the specific action taken tonight, because the council has given a specific direction. But the concern which I have about the more general phenomena is that we continue to make decisions about individual parcels, and in this particular case, a relatively small parcel on the boulevard, where we are attempting, in the broader scheme of things, to figure out what the right mix of use is. And I still don't understand how I can make decisions on individual parcels without understanding the context of the whole area. It's very possible, if I had the full understanding of the context, that I would understand that medical office would be the appropriate use for this 2-acre site that's a relatively small site, because there would be plenty of other retail space in the ideal mix. But we don't have that context to make a decision on, and I worry as we continue to make individual decisions and potentially impose limitations, as the council did in this particular instance, that the sum of those individual decisions will not give us the correct answer to the overall mix of use that will achieve the broader goal of the kind of mix of use that we want, that will create the kind of economic vitality and the kind of neighborhood servicing and the complements to the town. So while I support the position that Commissioner Jensen did, for all the reasons that she suggested, and that was, as Mr. Paulson knows, was the origin of my questions for him, I still am troubled by the fact that we continue to make those decisions, and I worry about the sum of those decisions helping us get to an answer that or getting us to an answer that is the wrong answer when we add them all up.
Okay. I do want to say duly noted, and I think almost all of us will agree that a Los Gatos Boulevard plan, an updated one, has been in need since last year. But however, without one, I can say, having the benefit of working on the North 40 specific plan committee, that we have identified what the needs of the community are, and at the numerous meetings and hearings that we had on this particular parcel, we've identified the desired uses. And so I feel very uncomfortable changing a design that has not been built. And I completely understand and hear the efforts that you have gone through in the past 3 years. But we are responsible for land use, not economic vitality. And we have needs, we have uses that we've agreed on, and so you don't change the design. You don't change the use to accommodate an approved design. It should be the other way around. And so I feel very comfortable if a motion were made in denying this, that would be an appropriate recommendation for the town council. Okay. Commissioner Telesfor?
I'll go ahead and vote that. And I think enough has been said. Anyway, so I move that we deny application plan development PD 11-004 at 15400 Los Gatos Boulevard, It's requesting approval to modify the existing plan development to remove the requirement that 8,500 square feet of the ground floor space must be retail or restaurant. This is a recommendation, and I think that would be that the plan development ordinance amendment is not internally consistent with the general plan and its elements. I mean, is that?
That's sufficient. Okay. I'm looking at our attorney. That's sufficient, right? We don't need to make findings for denial.
You don't need to make findings for denial. You can just make a recommendation to the town council for denial.
All right, okay. And do I have a second? Commissioner
Second.
Johnson?
And I would, for the record, I don't think we have to say anything about whether it's internally consistent with anything. It's just simply that we're looking at the ordinance that we have from the town council.
Yes.
And now we're making a recommendation for denial of the applicant's request to change essentially a portion of that ordinance, correct?
Right.
That's correct.
I would agree with that. I just didn't mean to say that.
Any comments or questions on the motion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously 6-0. And as mentioned, this is a recommendation to council. Ms. Bailey, do we have a date for this, or will this be advertised?
Yeah, we do not have a date yet, and this matter will be scheduled for a town council hearing, and it will be noticed.
Okay, thank you. And we are now at agenda item number 3. It is architecture and site application S-11-023, and it is located at 17350. And Ms. Mosley, will you be providing tonight's report?
I will in just one moment.
And Commissioners, while Ms. Mosley is getting ready, just show of hands that you've done a site visit, and if there are any disclosures anyone must make. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good evening. The property is located at the southeast corner of High Street and Cypress Way. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing single-story residence and detached garage and to construct a 2,839 square foot two-story residence with a 913 square foot basement and a 483 square foot detached garage. The proposed cellar is completely below grade and will have no visual impact on the height or elevations of the proposed residence. The application was reviewed by staff and determined to be in compliance with with town code and the residential design guidelines, and was considered by the Development Review Committee on August 16th of this year. Several neighbors on High Street attended the meeting and discussed their concerns regarding the second story and potential privacy concerns. The application was approved with the addition of several conditions regarding window changes and additional landscaping to address those neighbors' concerns. The application was appealed by 4 neighbors on August 25th of this year. The concerns of each neighbors are included in your staff report for further consideration. This completes staff's report. We are here if you have any questions.
Okay. Commissioner Telesfor?
Right. I'm hoping that maybe you could answer this before we start. Is the house sitting on the grade that it will be built on right now?
The proposed house will be in approximately the same location as the
same
existing.
location. And so then are the story poles consistent with the proposed height?
They are.
They are. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioners? Okay. At this time, I am going to call the appellant, but please bear with me. I need to confirm who the appellant is. The appellant attorney is what I'm being told. And if you could just identify give us your name and your address.
Certainly. My name is William Brooks, the law firm Brooks and Hess, 577 Salmar in Campbell. Pardon my throat. I hope it improves. Terry Hall, who is the appellant that signed the appeal, is out of town on business, out of state on business tonight, won't be back until tomorrow, and she's asked me to appear on her behalf. This appeal focuses on what we believe is the failure of the project to comply with policies that are set forth in the community design element of the town's general plan and the town's residential development standards. And specifically, it's 4 different sections of the community design element, CD 1.1, .2, .4, and .5. And in the short amount of time I have to address you, I'm not going to quote those to you, but if you have questions about the specific language, please ask me. What I will do is point out to you that all 4 of those really deal with trying to harmonize and blend the development that is coming into neighborhoods with the existing neighborhoods. And I'd like to point out to you how I believe this design fails and why the determination by the committee should be reversed. Take a look at sheet A1. It's in your staff report. It's an exhibit to the petitioners, to the applicants, rather, letter. If you look at A1, below the big picture of the house itself, there are 2 profiles. One of these profiles shows the site plus 2 homes uphill of the site on Cypress. The lower one shows the subject property and the home uphill of the site on High Street. My client, by the way, has the next home uphill on High Street. Note that all of these neighboring homes are cut into the hillside. They have retaining walls, and they've been lowered. They're not on the natural grade. The houses across the street from this house on Cypress at 16, 9, 51, and 55 Cypress are cut into the hillside. The house across the street on High Street, and the houses across the street on High Street, are cut into the hillside. All the neighboring houses on all sides of this site have been cut into the hill. That is the traditional character of this neighborhood. It's an effort to minimize the bulk of the structures by fitting them into the contours of the land rather than perching them on top of it. That's what this home should be required to do in order to comply with these community design elements. The residential development standards that are applicable here relate to the site development and to scale and mass issues. And the relevant ones are development standards 1A, 1 and 4, 2A and 2B, and again, I don't have time to quote them to you, but again, they really focus on the issues of balance. 2B of the residential development standards is, I think, particularly relevant. It deals with scale and mass. It discusses the 2-story residences, and this is an issue you've faced before. What happens when someone comes into the neighborhood and wants to build a 2-story residence, and you have a specific provision in the development standards that says that you are to determine, the applicant in that situation is to show you the reason why this has to be a 2-story home rather than a 1-story home. What the applicant has done is, first of all, to give you a list of 37 homes within a quarter mile of the site, built or extensively remodeled since 1985. 37 of them. 32 of the 37 are 2-story, which gives, to my mind, real substance to the concern that the town has that there is a developing tendency, strong developing tendency, just to go to the 2 stories. What the applicant did in responding to the requirement to show you the need really doesn't show you the need. What he said is, if it were 1 story, we'd have a smaller backyard and children would end up playing in the street. Well, that's a feel-good reason, but it's a want. It is not a reason why you cannot have a 2-story. And what should be done in this situation, also, by the way, we don't know who the future occupants are going to be. It's not the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
All right. I do have other things which I will bring up in response. There are a number of neighbors here who want to speak. And in particular, it involves the trees on the site.
Duly noted. For all those who are interested in speaking, please remember to submit your cards. And Mr. Brooks, as you know, at the end of everyone else's testimony, you'll have 3 more minutes. So, okay? But real quick, let's see if there's any questions for you. Commissioner Jensen.
I have 2 questions, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
My first question, Mr. Brooks, is remind me of the address of your client?
It is 370. The site is 350, the uphill neighborhood.
And that's a 2-story residence, is it not? Your client has a 2-story house?
It is a built-in.
Is it a 2-story house, Mr. Brooks?
Built-in, yes, built into the hillside.
My second question is the staff report, page 5. It addresses the question of building the house into the hillside, which was addressed at the DRC, and it indicates that if that were done, all of the trees on the site would be removed. Does your client have a problem with that?
Thank you very much for raising that, because that's where I was in my presentation. Yes, the staff report on page 5 says that residence is similar in height and scale to those in the immediate neighborhood, which for the reasons I've just described, I think is inaccurate. Lowering of the residence into the site would result in significant grading and removal of all the trees on the site. Look at what the staff report says on page 5 right above that. Look at what the arborist says. The staff report says, since the staff that they have agreed with the arborist already to the removal of 7 of the 15 trees. If you look at the arborist report, there's a plan and it shows X's through 7 of the trees. Those are going to go. Then it shows stars for 6 of the other trees. And we've got 15 trees on the site. 7 are going to go. 6 are shown to have stars on them. And what has the staff said about those 6? The staff has said these 6 trees would be permitted to be removed if the applicant desires. Losing 13 of the 15 trees on the site clearly is not of concern to the staff or to the arborist. So raising the comment that, gee whiz, we'd be taking all the trees, the staff's already said they can go. There are only 2 trees that the staff has said they would like to keep. One is an oak on the southeast corner. That's tree number 11. The arborist comment about tree number 11 is, it's on page 10 of the arborist report. This is the only tree, quotes, somewhat worth saving in this crowded mess of an area, close quotes. That's the arborist's opinion of the one tree in the southeast corner to be saved. This other tree is a maple, which is in the southwest corner, close to 17360, and it sits about 6 feet. I can't tell exactly because the scale of the map is extremely difficult, but it looks like it's about 6 feet from the southwest corner of the construction of the house. Immediately opposite it is a light well for the basement. So what's that going to go down, 8 feet? While that is a tree that the staff and the arborists say perhaps should be kept, they're planning on keeping it. If the property is lowered, if it is built into the hill, as all of the adjoining houses are built into the hill, is that going to damage tree number 6? Well, think of it. Here's the tree. 6 feet away is the basement. All of the roots from that tree headed toward the house are going to stop in 6 feet until they get down 8, 10 feet to the bottom of the basement. If you cut it down a few feet to lower that roof line, to make it less of a massive home, are you going to damage that tree? Highly unlikely. The oak, which is somewhat worth saving in this crowded mess of an area, is at the extreme eastern side of the property, well away from the house itself, behind the garage, and would not have to be impacted by lowering it. So the question is no. The applicants don't mind the trees coming down. You've all been up for a site visit. You've seen them. No, the applicant does not mind the trees coming down, and it wouldn't have to be all of them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Now I'll go ahead and call the applicant, and the applicant who will be speaking, Mr. Spalding. If you could fill one of these out later.
I get 5 minutes?
Yes,
Okay.
you do.
All right, thank you. I'll try to address all the concerns that the neighbors have written in their letters. So let me start with privacy. So the appellant, 2 doors up, wrote about their worry about privacy. When this project was approved at the DRC, they made conditions of approval. Let me put that floor plan here. So there's just a few windows that face the neighbor. One of them is bedroom 3. You have this in your, it's sheet A4. Bedroom 3 here. They've agreed to make those clerestory windows with a 5.5-foot sill. These 2 windows here at the master bathtub, they've agreed to frost those. There's a window here in the master closet that's already a little clerestory window. And then there's this window in the master bedroom that is, the adjacent house here should block it from the house 2 doors up. So there really shouldn't be any privacy issues. Another neighbor brought up the issue of shadows. There are no shadows cast on any neighbor by this house. Another issue was the size. I think the staff report pretty clearly shows on page 4 in their chart about how this house, half the houses in the immediate neighborhood are also 2-story, and it's compatible with there's larger houses in square footage, there's larger houses in FAR. So I think it's compatible in the neighborhood in that regard. As far as views, this is from the appellant's own letter here. This is the view from their living room window. And in my mind, this is a successful design because the house is down here, not blocking any of their view except for the lower parts of the trees and the telephone wires. Then finally, one reason why it's a 2-story house instead of a 1-story is that, as you can see on the site plan, the building envelope is very small because it's a corner lot. So if this was a 1-story house, it would completely essentially fill the entire building envelope, and there would not be a backyard. And so then let me finally address the streetscape. So as you can see on my streetscape on sheet A1, when I designed this, I realized that this is up on that little embankment. And so what I did was put the open porch on that corner. So what you're going to see as you drive up Cypress is that 1-story element. It's an open wraparound porch that hides the 2nd-story bulk behind it, which is set back 8 or 10 feet from the first floor open porch. So that's going to be a nice attractive feature. It's not this big 2-story wall sitting up on that hill. And then in terms of grading this down, first of all, what we're proposing is pretty much putting the house on the existing grade. As you can see here on A5 on our side elevation, this is the uphill side towards the neighbor. You can see how on the uphill side, our floor level is right at existing grade. And then already at the uphill corner, this is the survey, at the back corner where that oak tree that we need to keep, there's already a 3-foot tall wall, and then it goes up another 3 feet to the corner. So this was already cut into the hill to create the flat pad for the existing house. If we lower this down, every foot we lower it down, we have to lower the whole, not just the footprint, but the whole pad so that it continues to drain and so the house isn't built into a hole. So you're talking extensive grading just to get a foot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spalding.
Okay.
Commissioners, any questions of Mr. Spalding? Okay. And as you recall, Mr. Spalding, you'll also have 3 minutes afterwards. Okay? So now I'm going to open it up to the public. I'll go ahead and call your name. Just a reminder, when you come up to the podium, please state your name and your address so that we have it accurately reflected in our minutes. And the first speaker will be Richard Palorani? Palfa. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Richard Padovani, and my wife and I are the property owners at 16951 Cypress Way, which is directly across from the property on High Street in question. We've been the homeowners there since 1998, and I'd like to say that, you know, we understand the need for a development in a community and so on. That's very good news that that we have that. It shows the vibrancy of the community, but where does it turn bad? And I think I'd like to thank the gentleman that started off addressing a very succinct summary of the concerns that we have. I think that was well done, and a lot of the things I have here agree exactly with what the gentleman said, so I won't waste your time with repeating that. But where does the good news turn bad? Well, the good news turned bad when you start to ignore the harmonious compatibility relationship that's stated in your code, right? In this case, I can tell you, having been in that corner, and I think you'll hear from the rest of my neighbors, that this is clearly the case. Okay, all of the homes in this area are set into the grade. My home is actually lower than the home that's being rebuilt here. It is up on a knoll on a much higher level. It doesn't have retainer walls, and it's not built into the same grade as most of the other homes. I'm actually at a lower level, and I have retainer walls on my property. And if you look at the way the area was planned previously, there was a nice, even grade to the thing. I think the other point to point out is that this doesn't only have an impact on the neighbors. We're the ones who suffer the most, obviously, with that, but it has an impact on the whole community and the property values of all of us at large here. And if you look at that, you really have to listen to the close-in neighbors, because we really feel the impact, which the rest of the community will feel later on as we proceed with this. So a few points were mentioned. I'll just hit a couple of those again. I think that the new construction is clearly oversized with respect to the rest of the homes in the property. That's not appropriate. It already is set up on a knoll, so it's higher than the rest of the homes. Going to the second story makes it even more intrusive. Now, it's also at a big T intersection. You know that T intersection there. Most of you have seen that. It's an entrance to our neighborhood. Having an oversized house, I don't want to use the term McMansion, but putting a property of that size there with a wraparound porch right on that street makes no sense to us at all. So we're requesting, just in summary, we're requesting, of course, not that you stop the construction, but that you address it in a way that lowers the elevation, preferably keeping it to a one-story, or at least lower the elevation, use retainer walls as the rest of the properties have, and to the wraparound porch, I think, is just not appropriate. I don't think any of you would like to live on that corner with a wraparound porch. So some thought to consider.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Phil, is it Couchy? Couchés.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Phil Couchet. I live at 16900 Cypress Way. I've lived at this property for over 50 years, and a couple of the factors of the quality of life in that neighborhood is privacy, of course, and views. And particularly in that corner section of the neighborhood, we all respect each other's views and privacy by allowing vegetation high enough to maintain privacy, yet cut down and allow for views. Our property itself is not affected by either of those factors. However, my neighbors are, and I'm here to support their concerns over the height of the building primarily. Excuse me. In reading the staff report, it seems like the primary hesitation for allowing the site to be dropped is the trees, the vegetation. And as Mr. Brooks stated, the arborist and town staff agree that saving the vegetation, I think the word was debatable. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of value in the vegetation on site. Staff has acknowledged that many of the houses on High Street are stepped, and a deterrent from building a two-story or lowering the site on the project is to have to build a retaining wall. My comment to that is welcome to the neighborhood. You know, the entire area is built with cut-ins and retaining walls. In fact, the house just adjacent to the project, between his house and my house, has a 4-foot retaining wall. Step 4 more feet towards my property. It steps up 2 more feet to my retaining wall. Step up another 15, 20 feet to my 4-foot retaining wall. So, you know, as you walk through that neighborhood, excuse me, retaining walls are predominant. You know, as a soil engineer stated in his report, you know, the soil's unstable, there's a lot of movement, and I'm sure that's prevalent throughout the neighborhood because we're on a hill. And we're on a hill that has a tremendous amount of water flowing it down almost all winter long. You know, as others have stated, this is a unique piece of property. It's a knoll that is at the convergence of 3 streets. I would just ask the commission to consider that and look at mitigating ways to reduce the size or the height of that project so that it better fits into the neighbors. Most of the houses, as you walk up and down the street, specifically High Street, you have to walk down to their house. This is you're going to have to step up to. Thank you.
Mr. Couchet. Any questions? Commissioner Smith?
I just have one quick question. I know you have retaining walls. Do you also have drainage issues?
Big time.
And what have you done to?
We've all put sump pumps in. We've all put French drains in. We've all put gullies in. It's life living in the hills.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. The next speaker is Kim Couchet. Oh, okay. The next speaker is Nozar Nozarian.
Hi, good evening. So my name is Nozar Nozarian. I'm the owner of the property at 17355 High Street. I've actually moved in just last month. My property is actually right across the street on High Street. And so effectively I'm directly affected by whatever will be built there. And so my concern is mainly the vertical footprint of the proposed development. So to be more specific, I have a 1-story house right across the street. And so High Street actually has a slope, right? So if you cross the street, you're actually higher than the site where I'm at. Now, on top of it, that property is sitting on the knoll, right? And so if you add to that the fact that the proposed development will be a 2-story building, my worry is that basically I'll be looking at basically a lighthouse, you know, across the street. So today, what you have on High Street is a wall of greenery, the jungle, as I call it, that is basically covering that property. So I understand from the planning and the plans that I received from the developer that most of that greenery will completely go away, and that structure will be in place with new trees, young trees, right, that will not cover anything. So my worry is that this house would effectively stick out and not be in the character of the rest of the neighborhood, which is mainly one of the reasons that I decided to move in there. And also I'd like you to consider the fact that that house sits at the corner of 3 streets that are very well frequented, right? So High Street, Loma Alta, and Cypress. So it's not just the neighbors who are immediately right around that development that will be affected, but literally hundreds of residents who will be passing by that development and be affected by whatever's built there. So thanks for hearing me.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Next speaker is Paul Ruddy.
Good evening. I'm Paul Ruddy. I live at 16955 Cypress Way, which is across the street diagonally from the proposed new development. And my main concern is just the appropriateness of the footprint, and how it affects the streetscape. I think everyone's expressed concerns about the mass and scale of the property. And personally, my property is cut into the hill. I have a retaining wall on both sides of my property, one to the uphill side and one on the downhill side leading to my other neighbor. So both sides we have retaining walls. I have a French drain to deal with some of the drainage issues, and I think that's an appropriate solution here to reduce the impact of the second story on the neighborhood. So I'm glad that that a particular house is being upgraded, and I would just urge that it be upgraded in a way that's consistent with the character of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions? Okay, thank you for your time. Next speaker is Vicki Ratner.
Good evening. I'm Vicki Ratner. I'm at 17360 High Street, which is right next door to the home in question. And I guess there's something I'd like to emphasize that Mr. Brooks said, and that was 32 of the 37 houses since 1985 have been built in our neighborhood that have been second-story homes, either remodeled almost completely or just rebuilt. And if you check the town's website under Residential Development Standards, Section 2, Design of Los Gatos, I'm just going to quote that. While there are many creative second-story designs, the town is concerned that property owners and developers are restricting their design alternatives to only second-story. A continuation of this trend would jeopardize the character of our neighborhoods. So that's from your website. And just think 32 out of 37 houses are already 2 stories. I happen to live in a 1-story house, but I don't see why there's any reason that this can't be a 1-story house, especially since it's a spec home. There aren't any reasons presented that I could tell this evening, and maybe you can educate me, but I haven't heard anything that makes it an absolute necessity to have that. There are, the issue of privacy is paramount, and there are significant privacy issues. As I know I had a site visit yesterday, and I took the person to the backyard just to show them, and it looks directly into, the second story looks directly into my bedroom and my entire backyard. So I don't understand some of the photographs that were shown earlier that showed 2 big trees that blocked everything, but that's just not the case. The issue of privacy also affects several other neighbors in the vicinity, particularly 17370 High Street, which is the house up from me. So we're the 2 houses probably most affected, and all one needs to do is come to our homes and to see how obvious it is. I've enjoyed the privacy for the past 20 years. I pay high property taxes like everybody does in this area, and we would like to be able to continue to count on privacy. I think it would devalue our properties in the area, and I think that if it's absolutely necessary to build a second story, that the window in question be placed on the east side of the house. that would solve the problem.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? Actually, Ms. Ratner, you do have one question?
I know that you had a concern with the shadows as far as affecting your garden.
Yeah. That,
Now,
I would say that's minor on the scale of things.
Well, I was going to ask you, did you look at A1 of the?
I did, and actually, I
so-
think it's not accurate. It shows the shadows only going the other direction, but it's not an accurate picture.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. And our final speaker is Peter Zekin.
Hi, I'm Peter Zakeen, and I live at 17370. And, you know, I've got a privacy problem. Right now, when you're in my living room or the deck right off my living room, my kitchen or my bedroom, I can look out and I can directly see the windows of the third bedroom and also the windows in the master bedroom next to the fireplace where it's going to be. Both of those, one of them is hasn't been addressed at all. The other one, they were talking about having a window at 5'6", which I don't think there's anybody here that wouldn't be able to look out of a 5'6" window. So that doesn't do anything for my privacy. I figure if I can see those windows, they can see me. You know, originally we were talking about lowering the home 3 feet in the grade like all the other homes in the neighborhood to make it look like the other homes in the neighborhood. And that would definitely solve the privacy issue because now we have those windows at least 3 feet lower. They're not going to be able to look into my house. They won't be able to look into Vicki Ratner's house. That would be a way to solve it. But the last time we had at the last meeting, the civil engineer said that no more soil can be removed, but now I understand that it can be because of the trees. So I guess in conclusion, I just want to say if the grade can't be altered, then I think we should just go back to a one-story building or a one-story construction, and that way all the privacy issues will be the way they were originally. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you. And that is, I'm sorry, you do have one question.
Yep, I do. But about how many, I was out there yesterday, but about how many feet are there between your house and the proposed house?
I guess 50 feet.
Only
I have no idea.
Okay, it looked a little more than that
You
to
have.
me. Okay.
Well, you're
thanks.
better.
Actually, just clarify, your address is 17370, right? So you're 2 houses away?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that was the last of my speaker cards. And I see no one else coming forward to speak, so I will ask the applicant, Mr. Spalding, you'll have 3 minutes, and then after the applicant, Mr. Brooks, you'll have an additional 3 minutes.
And maybe I should pass this around. This, you can't see it very well on this screen, but this is the window from the neighbor whose privacy is worried about. I'll pass this around.
Actually, Mr. Spalding, we have
you
this.
have the colored
yes.
photos?
So if you
Okay.
want to just clarify which picture you want your
It's
point
in
to.
photo B, and photo A is taken from standing on the roof of the house that's being demolished, looking towards his living room, and you can see that. So when standing on this roof, this is about the height of the windows on the new house. So a clear-story window is going to block. I mean, you're not going to be able to see that house. You'll just be able to see the trees above. And then on photo A, you can see, looking at the immediate neighbor, they don't have a single window on that end of the house, and you can see the window poking over the top of the roof line of the house above that. So I really don't think there's a privacy issue with the changes. With the,
Excuse me, please. Excuse me, Ms. Ratner. We're trying to listen to Mr. Spalding. Thank you.
Okay, so let me get back to the lowering it down. And we're not opposed to lowering it down. It seems like, this house already has retaining walls on the uphill property lines. At the uphill corner, there's already a 6-foot or a 7-foot grade difference between our property and the next property up on Cypress. There's already a grade difference between our property and the next property up on High Street. So we could lower it down. Well, if that'll add retaining walls, it will kill the trees and it'll increase the grading dramatically. And if we get a foot, the house is under 25 feet already. We could get another foot, maybe another 2 feet down by grading, but all that extra grading and retaining walls just doesn't seem like it really accomplishes much.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Telesfor and then Commissioner Bushwell.
Just a question. Is there any way, when you were talking about lowering the houses without additional grading, is there any way to perhaps lower the ridge beam or any other ideas?
It's already a 4 and 12 pitch, which is a shallow pitch.
Okay, thank you.
It's already right at grade.
Okay.
Floor.
Commissioner Bushwell.
Thank you, Mr. Spalding. Could you just, we heard a lot of comments about one story. Could you just address the design process you went through and how you arrived at a 2-story house and what the constraints are and pros and cons of 1-story versus 2-story?
Well, the biggest constraint here is it's a corner lot, so it has larger setbacks than the adjacent parcels. So on the site plan, you can see the building envelope is not large, and our 1-story, our first floor footprint and porches, if you were to take our 2nd story and put it in the empty space available in the building setback, it fills that entire building envelope, leaving the only yard area, the front yard, which is a slope, or the 8-foot side yard to the south, or the 20-foot setback behind the garage, which is actually there's a 3-foot retaining wall before that oak tree, or right behind that oak tree. So we'd be left with a yard that's about 20 feet by 30 feet, which is, most people I don't think would find that adequate.
Any other questions? Commissioner Telesfor.
Yeah, I just have one, and that's on the corner. There's some very large evergreen bushes. I've forgotten what they are called, but are those I don't remember if it's in the report. Are those staying or being trimmed down, or what do you plan on doing with those?
Well,
They're rather established.
The trees along High Street you're talking about, right? Yeah.
The bushes right on the corner. The kind of edge
right on the
both
corner?
Cypress and High. They look like, I don't know what you call them.
They're going to take all the brush out.
Okay,
Replace it.
Thank you. I just wanted to know. Thank you.
And Mr. Spalding, I'm sorry, Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
On A1, I notice in the back, again, and maybe it is in here, but it just says landscape screening. See where you have your plot, more or less, and then it's written in landscape screening. It's in the back of the house. Am I the only one that has that?
Can I comment for a quick second?
Exhibit 7.
Yeah, you're looking at the revised, the notes that were added per the discussion at DRC. So the set of plans that Chris Spalding created do not have that on them. Those were additions that more clearly show the conditions that were added per the DRC discussion.
So would Mr. Spalding be able to answer the question as to what they are, or shall I save that for staff?
He can answer the question, he just needs to be looking at the right exhibit.
I don't have that in front of me.
Well, perhaps you can just speak generally. You can just tell me what the landscape plans are for the back of the house.
Well, that was a condition of approval. So we would work, what we normally do is work with staff to come up with the yeah, thanks, to get appropriate height screening that
That's
would,
what I was getting to, is the
Yeah.
height screening.
it can be whatever makes the neighbors happy, essentially. It's this, we probably wouldn't want it to get too tall, not like redwoods or something, but you know, maybe a tree that tops out at about 25 feet, so it would effectively block the visual.
Like dense, like an Italian cypress or something like that?
That's a good candidate because it's tall and narrow. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, and Mr. Spalding, the question I was going to start was, so by cutting into, I understand that grading, tree removal are two of the potential issues by sinking it further down. Are there any other potential issues that we should know about? Any drainage issues that you can elaborate on?
Well, there is a drainage issue, and so to keep that from being a problem, you can't just lower the house down into a hole. You have to grade it.
The entire parcel.
The whole, so that right now, if you look at on sheet A5, the rear elevation, you can see how from the back of the garage it slopes down to the front of the house so that the backyard can drain. So as the house got cut down into the hill, that slope would have to remain so that essentially the whole site gets lowered along with the house.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Erickson.
In response to Commissioner Bourgeois' question about if you were going to lower it to a single floor, if I followed you correctly, you made the assumption that all 1,135 square feet that are on the second floor would need to be added to the first floor, as opposed to, and I'm not trying to design from here, as opposed to some of it going into the basement and some of it going onto the first floor, which would take obviously a smaller footprint. So could you comment on that as a potential design alternative?
Yes. There are some things that are appropriate to be subterranean, but the main living areas are not, and the main bedrooms are not. I mean, most people are willing to have a guest suite in the basement, things like a bonus room or a playroom or a media room, but not your kitchen, not your living room, not your master suite. So if you look at our second story, we have the master suite and two kids' bedrooms, so neither of which is really appropriate in the basement. And what we have we only have a partial basement now, and what's down there is the game room.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Spalding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Brooks, you will now have 3 minutes.
A couple of quick points. The discussion about the clerestory window at 5.6 or 5.5 feet. Last month, you dealt with a property on Short Road, which also had a clerestory window of 5.5 feet. And one of the things that you did was to change that to 6 feet, which would address one of the issues about 5.6 being a little small. 6 feet's up here. 5.6 is, that puts the sill right at essentially my nose level and chin levels for other folks. So that is a possible compromise with regard to that, or moving it around to the rising sun side of the house. The comment he made about drainage at the end in response, Madam Chair, to your question, that you can't just lower it into a hole. Of course not. He would have the same drainage-related issues that every other house on that hill has, and would address it presumably in the same fashion. So that's nothing special. That's not a particular burden, it seems to me, to place on him. It's the burden that everybody who chooses to live on that hill has. The issue of resolving the problem of privacy by planting 25-foot Italian cypresses or whatever they may be, creating a wall, yes, that would do it, but in terms of view and the general feeling of openness in the neighborhood, that would certainly make a significant change to it. The comment that Mrs. Ratner made about privacy, if you will remember in her presentation, did have to do with her backyard, not with windows or lack of windows on her side of on the common side of the house with the site. So the focus there was privacy in the backyard. Our preference would be a one-story house. If a one-story house is not appropriate, then certainly an alternative could be do the same thing that everyone else in the neighborhood has done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Let's see if there are any questions. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Bourgeois?
Thank you. I just want to pose a hypothetical to you. Playing devil's advocate in this, we're trying to look at all sides of this argument. This house is being proposed. It meets all of the setbacks, all of the height, all of the FAR. It doesn't exceed the maximum square footage allowed in the zone. So given that we have those facts in front of us, I know you quoted several elements from the general plan as well as the residential design guidelines. What is the essence of, it sounds like it's neighborhood compatibility and height, but putting yourselves in our shoes where it meets all the requirements of the zone, where do you see the crux of the issue being?
The crux of the issue is not just that it does or does not meet the FAR. The major complaints of the appellant and the other neighbors doesn't have to do with whether it's 2,800 square feet or 2,400 square feet or 1,800 or 3,400 square feet. That's not the issue. It's the bulk, it's the mass, and therefore it is the direction, the policy. And the word policy in your general plan says this is a regulation. Nothing further has to do to implement it. This is a guide to what has to be considered. And the policy is that you look to trying to not jeopardize the harmony of the neighborhood. You had the gentleman who just moved in a month ago. I moved into this neighborhood, and the appearance of the neighborhood is what was attractive to him, and here a month later, it looks to him as if that's being jeopardized. And that, regardless of whether the other issues are met, that's something that in the residential design standards you should be taking into consideration. We're not saying he can't build 2,800 square feet. We're not saying he can't have a .34, 32, whatever it is, FAR. What we're saying is consider the design review standards, the policies that the general plan and the residential design review standards really impose on you to please keep the design of this house, the mass, the bulk of this house, the appearance of it from across the street and from across the back fences and side fences in harmony with the neighborhood. And you have the power to do that under the residential design standards. And we believe that's what the Development Review Committee should have done.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brooks. Okay, at this time, I will close the public testimony. And commissioners, do I have any questions of staff? Commissioner Jensen.
This is a process question, and I'm not sure if the staff will know the answer or the attorney will know the answer. Because this is an appeal, and it's coming to us as an appeal, I know if, for example, you appeal something from the Planning Commission to the Town Council, there are certain standards that are in our ordinances about how you can grant an appeal, how you can't grant an appeal. Are we looking at this as a brand-new hearing where nothing has happened before, or are we looking at this as a decision's been made by an administrative body that bears some weight that we have to take into consideration such that we need to find error or some, what weight does the prior decision have in our consideration tonight?
I can answer. The Planning Commission has the same purview that the Development Review Committee had in considering this application.
So it doesn't matter what
Correct.
they did.
Commissioner Telesfor.
Before we start any deliberation, I have a question that's a little bit outside of maybe what anyone's thinking tonight. But when I was out there making that site, it was interesting that the address for this house is on High Street, and yet the front door faces Cypress. And I'm just asking, is there any way, is there a logic there? Because I'm thinking that if I was calling for an emergency vehicle, that it could be confusing. And as a matter of fact, I noticed that the beam had, it had its address twice, and it was, so it stood out on Cypress. It said High Street. I mean, it's very confusing, and I've lived in situations like that. So is that going to be modified?
It's not a request by either the building department or the fire department at this time. It is something that occasionally does get cleaned up through the building permit process if it is a desire of the fire department or a concern for public safety, but it has not been brought to the attention of staff at this time. It's an existing situation that I can't speak to exactly if it ever did have a door or access that instigated it being addressed off of High Street at one point.
Well, can we do something about that here?
That would really be the purview of the building and fire department as well as the applicant. Where the front door is and where this actual address is, that's common not to be the same.
On that house?
No, and in other areas of the town. It's not a requirement.
I understand that. I thought since we were, it was being renovated and rebuilt, we could maybe throw that into it, but, okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Without questions, any comments that anyone would like to share? Commissioner Bourgeois?
All right, I'll get us started here. First of all, I'd like to just assure the neighbors that several of us up here were involved in preparing and writing the residential design guidelines and standards. And in fact, we actually used this neighborhood as a case study. We actually had a walking tour of this neighborhood with senior planners and the town's architect because of all of the issues you've been talking about, because of the grade changes, because of the difficulties with scale, because it's somewhat of an eclectic neighborhood. Some portions are in transition, some portions are more stable. So, we actually looked at Loma Alta and Cypress and Johnson, I believe. We walked that whole loop looking at as a case study as we were developing those standards. So I just want to assure you that we're familiar with these issues. They have been thought through, and they've been thought through in the context of developing those standards. That being said, when I reviewed this on my own before I came here tonight and heard all the evidence presented, I didn't find it was necessarily a neighborhood compatibility issue. There is some difficulties with the lot. It is a tricky lot. It's on a knoll. It's on a prominent corner. I personally didn't feel it was out of character for the neighborhood. That being said, I was circling house locations as people were coming up and speaking, and there's a good portion of the neighborhood that feels differently. So, you know, what is neighborhood compatibility? I can view it one way, but if the entire neighborhood feels differently, then I have to take that as you know, weighing something and having some significance. So I'm a little conflicted here. I'd love to hear the thoughts of my other commissioners. I also have concerns about dropping the elevation of the pad. We've heard about the drainage issues. We've heard about the retaining walls. And, you know, if that's just the price of doing business in this neighborhood, well, why would we want to create that situation, make it worse? You know, if it doesn't have the drainage issues now, I don't see, just because everyone else has to deal with a bad drainage issue, that we should force this other parcel too. So those are just some preliminary thoughts of mine to get things started.
Thank you, Commissioner Bourgeois. And Commissioner Johnson?
I too walk this neighborhood as part of the residential design standards review and development. It's an extraordinarily diverse and eclectic neighborhood. So it's very hard to say that even with this corner, is this High Street? Is it Cypress? Is it the top of Loma Alta? What is it? So the neighbors come in and want to define it one way. Other people want to define it another way. In the guidelines, it's the house behind, the house across the street, and the house, I forget, catty corner. And there are two-story houses around there, and even though we're not supposed to give any weight to the DRC, these concerns were raised at the DRC, and they look at these houses quite frequently and these developments. And it is the case, and I respect this, that people get used to living with a certain situation, and they don't want it to change. But our policies and guidelines don't guarantee a static state. What they do is attempt to guarantee a reasonable development when it comes in. It seems to me that based upon the residential guidelines and what we're asking about, and I'm sure that none of you would want to live in a house that had windows that were 6 feet high and frosted over. It's not a very pleasant living environment. So to come in and want someone to have that imposed on them, I think if you step back a little bit, you might reflect and say, well, maybe that's not so reasonable. This design seems to me to be reasonable, so I have trouble overturning the decision that has been made. I really do. But I'll listen to my fellow commissioners about that.
Any other thoughts? Okay, I'll go ahead and share some of mine. When, you know, it's an admirable community, I have to say. When we walk the neighborhood, I think police were called on us 2 or 3 times because there was a large group of us just walking the streets. But that being said, when I did my site visit, I found it, you know, in trying to reconcile a particular parcel on paper with what's actually there. And we talk a lot about the residential design guidelines, and I actually have it turned here. And, you know, the question of 1-story versus 2-story. Well, you know, you can make an argument either way. If you look at the 224 that we have for corner lots, you can say half of it's 2-story, half of it's 1. And then you look at the site location, and you could say, well, because it's at a knoll, it's at a distinct advantage, and so because of that height, you should reduce it. But I do think that the fact that it is on a very busy intersection, and they are trying to preserve a backyard, whether it's a family or whether it's just 2 people living there, I think it's reasonable to say that 2 stories to prevent to give whoever owns that neighborhood some privacy in their own backyard is a reasonable request. So the 2-story versus 1-story, that's a very difficult one. I see arguments on both sides. So again, looking at it on paper and thinking things through before coming to the hearing and listening to comments, you can lean towards one way. But I do give a lot of weight to those that are actually going to be living with it on a daily basis. And you're telling me this is going to affect you substantially in a negative way, and I have no other documentation, no other fact to say, no, that is in fact not going to happen. And so yes, it does fulfill all the requirements on paper, but I do have to give some weight. Well, people are telling me it's still too large. What does that mean? It's very difficult to then say to the applicant, you need to do this based on something like that. But we have had situations like this where we say, let's try it one more time and see if the applicant can meet with the neighbors. Is it just trying to, maybe changing the roof pitch, maybe something with the porch? It's very difficult. I'm not a designer, but I'm inclined to try and see if they can have another go around at this. And that's where I'm leaning right now. Any other comments? Would anyone like to make a motion? Okay, I'll see if I'll get a second and any support. Based on the conflicts that I've been hearing among the commissioners that have articulated the concerns that have been raised tonight, let me turn to the appropriate page. I would like to ask the applicant to take another look at this and see if there are ways to address the height and the scale and the mass, to address some of the issues that have been raised. The issues that have been raised tonight were privacy. It sounds like the windows are a good compromise. I'd like to get that in stone. The landscaping, see if there's significant landscaping that could be added onto that the neighbors would find reasonable. Let's see, the morning sun, I believe that the sunshade, I believe that has been addressed. There's been nothing to refute that the shadow study that has been submitted is incorrect. And just let's see if there's another design, whether it's looking at maybe if I don't know, I'm not even going to throw out suggestions, but I'd like to see it come back at another time to see if we can get a second go around at this. Commissioner Telesfor.
Thank you. That was well spoken. I would probably support that. I know that you've worked hard on this, but because of the frosted windows and the clear story windows, the back of the house then becomes rather, or the side, it just, the windows are bothering me the way they're placed, and I think it's because you're trying to do the privacy. So I don't know what else could be done, but I will support that motion.
Is that a second, Commissioner Telesfor? Okay. Commissioners, any thoughts on Commissioner Smith?
Many thoughts. We've all been to the neighborhood, and many of us, like myself, live in neighborhoods that are very eclectic, and we deal with compatibility issues. I find the design reasonable. I find that the applicant has made all the modifications that was requested of him. And I do think that the design would be compatible with the neighborhood. My main concern was the landscaping, which I know will be dealt with by staff. So for those reasons, I would not be able to support the motion.
Okay. Any other comments? Commissioner Jensen.
For the reasons I stated earlier, I sort of agree with Commissioner Smith. However, it's worthwhile, given the extent of the opposition, for the applicant to give it a shot at seeing if there's something that can be done. It's also worthwhile for the applicant to come back and tell us why it's impractical to do anything else in a very specific manner, if that's the case. So I will support the motion, but maybe you can do something, maybe you can't. And if you can't, I, for one, would like to see very specifically why you can't change the design that you presented to us.
Commissioner Erickson.
May I ask you, for be sure I'm understanding what you're asking them to address? So you're asking them to address height, you're asking them to address privacy, you're asking them to address scale and mass, and you're asking them to address landscaping.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that I understood and that they would understand what in the event that this motion passed, what we were asking them to respond to specifically. And we're not providing them any direction on any of those issues. We're just asking them to respond to those issues.
Correct. Okay. Any other questions on the motion? Another question I'll ask, and this time to staff, is, well, let's see if it passes, and then we'll see if we need to even look at dates. Okay, so again, the motion is to continue it, and there's no specific, there are issues identified that need reconciliation, and with no specific direction in terms of you must meet X, Y, or Z. That's the motion. Okay, so all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed, say nay. Nay? Okay. So I have 4 in support and 2 in opposition, Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Erickson. Okay? So now that I have that, I'll see if we can set this for a certain date.
November 9th.
Okay. And I'm going to open the public hearing briefly to ask a specific question of Mr. Spalding. Do you think you could be ready by November 9th?
They don't seem to want to come back November 9th. They want to know if you could just ask that it be graded down 2 feet, and if that would satisfy everyone.
There's already been a motion passed, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to see, is November 9th the earliest that this can come back? It sounds like they have a pretty quick, I'm assuming pretty quick solution, and so given that we're in the end of September, could we put them in an October meeting?
We would probably need revisions within a week to meet that meeting.
I wish I could do.
If he can do that, we can schedule it for October 26th.
So, Mr. Spalding, it sounds like the earliest that we can get something on the agenda would be October 26th. It sounds like there's discussion that needs to happen, and so I'd ask that you and staff work out how best to address that.
Yes, and if for some reason they can't meet October 26th, we can always bump them out another 2 weeks if they need more time.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen?
Do we need a motion to continue it to October 26th?
Yes, we do.
If so, so moved.
Okay, do I have a second? Commissioner Talasfor seconds. All those in favor for October 26th, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So it passes to October 26th. Okay, and Mr. Spalding, I do ask that you'll just work it out with staff. Okay, thank you. And so that concludes all our public hearings for the evening. Ms. Bailey, do you have a report from Community Development?
Yes, I do. I have an update regarding an item that came before you, Pizza Simpatico at 109 West Main Street, which now has a new name. I believe it's, what is it?
Centonove.
Centonove, thank you. I don't know Italian, so. The project was approved. It did get approved with less seating. They have 31 seats indoors, no outdoor seats. And they approved it with more retail use, a minimum of 520 square feet. And they also directed staff to clean up the CUP because there was one CUP for both uses, and so they directed staff to get a CUP for that other restaurant use. So they actually have 2 separate CUP numbers, and that's going to council on October 3rd. So it's the same conditions, it's just going to have its own conditional use permit number and act totally separately.
Thank you. It looks like you have questions, Commissioner
I have a
Telesfor.
question about that. Did I read or hear or something, no, I think I read it, that there was going to be a wall?
Commissioner Telesfor, hold on. If I could ask you guys to take it out. Thank you.
There was a doorway there before.
A doorway, tell me.
Between the two restaurants.
Yes.
And originally it was for access.
Yes.
And it was determined that wasn't needed, so that wall will be closed.
And the ramp that went down into the next room? That'll be deleted as well, eliminated?
Well, yeah, there'll be no access.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith, did you have a question?
That was my same
Okay.
question.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Any other reports? No?
That's it.
And Commissioners, any commission matters? Commissioner Jensen?
I'd like to make a formal request that I did by email earlier, that when Bella Vista gets scheduled for October 12th, that it be at the very beginning of the agenda or at the very end of the agenda, so that two commissioners don't have to go to the back.
Duly noted. Okay. Any other items? Okay, meeting adjourned.